this name has long become a symbol. Perhaps among fans of Disney films and series, there are many who do not realize that it is actually a surname. At the same time, in the mid-20th century, Walt Disney was one of the most famous people on the planet, second only to politicians. But what was he really like? He suppressed those who did not share his views. He was criticized for sexism, anti-Semitism, and a lack of talent, being accused of having only one skill, profiting from the ideas of others. He transformed animation into an art form and achieved immense success in various fields. Indeed, this is true. What more could be expected from one of the most influential people of the 20th century? If you think that Walt Disney is just a kind grandfather who created a few cartoon characters from childhood, you are greatly mistaken. Let's take a closer look at what this man was really like. Let's start with a small test. Consider the famous Disney characters: Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Cinderella, Bambi, and Snow White. Which of them was created by Walt Disney? In fact, none of them belonged to Walt himself, and moreover, Disney did not draw them. Walt Disney did not even draw the characters that became symbols of his company. His own signature looks different, yet he is still recognized as a genius of animation. I have just one question. How is this possible? The answer will not be simple, so let's get to the point. At the time of the events, he is almost 18 years old on paper, but in the photograph, he looks no older than 16. During World War I, he voluntarily became a driver for the Red Cross in France. Walt had always been a fan of adventure. In 1919, his father, Elias, was involved in jelly production in Chicago. Upon returning from the war, young Walt found it logical to work at his father's factory, as he grew up in a working-class family that constantly faced financial difficulties. Disney's father had many businesses, but not all of them were successful, which may have influenced Walt's decision to pursue a different path in life. Walt craved attention, wanted to engage in activities that brought him joy, and dreamed of achieving success. Walt uses the money he earned during his service in Europe and moves out of his parents' home to Kansas City, the city where he spent most of his childhood. He intends to start his creative career, although he is not exactly sure in which field. There are two options: acting or artistic endeavors, with the latter seeming more logical. For reference, Kansas City is the largest city in the state, located in the heart of the United States, but it is still considered provincial compared to New York and Los Angeles, the major centers of cinema at that time. Finding work as an actor here will be no easier than as an artist, as advertising requires artists to promote businesses. Walt finds job openings through the connections of his older brother. He brings along his amateur drawings to showcase them to potential employers. After a short probationary period, Disney secures his first position, where he draws advertising brochures and catalogs. Enthralled by his new task and the learning process, he does not leave his desk throughout the day, skipping breaks and lunches. At this moment, Walt feels that his life is coming together successfully, as he is doing what he has always dreamed of. Less than a year later, the company faces financial difficulties, and several employees, including Walt Disney and iWorks, lose their jobs. They share the fact that both began their careers as artists without completing their education. In other respects, Disney and iWorks were completely different in character. One of them would go on to create a character that became famous worldwide, and that person would not be Walt Disney. Disney and iWorks quickly find new jobs at a company that produces commercials. It is important to note that these commercials are created using animation. By the early 1920s, animation had only a few decades of history and was not considered an art form. Without color and sound, it represented an intriguing technology. Each moment of movement of the drawn characters was photographed separately, and all the frames were then combined into film. By running the film through a projector, the characters came to life. Although these early images may seem naive now, in the 1920s, they were considered cutting-edge high-tech art. It was this combination of technology and art that attracted Disney and would become the driving force of his career for many years to come. Disney immerses himself in mastering the new technology, studying rare manuals and famous photographs from My Bridge, which capture the phases of movement of living beings as well as short cartoons. He delves into various aspects of animation, from drawing to the technical intricacies of combining frames. During his studies, Disney discovers an interesting fact. There are two ways to make a drawn character move. The first method involves frame-by-frame movement of a cutout character, which is a stop-motion technique. The main drawback of this method is the unnatural and unrealistic movement, which is what Walt used in his new job. The second method, which Disney discovered for himself, is cell animation, where each phase of a character's movement is drawn separately, up to 12 frames for 1 second of action. This approach provides a significantly higher level of realism and becomes a turning point for Disney. Walt occupies the garage in his parents' home, borrows a camera from work, and begins conducting experiments. His parents are not entirely supportive of his ambitions. His father was not thrilled about his son's desire to become an illustrator, even though he understood that it was a legitimate profession. He had 5 children, and Walt was the 4th. Elias worked in farming, construction, newspaper delivery, and several other ventures. Due to frequent setbacks, the family had to live modestly, and Walt began working from a young age. As a result, Walt Disney did not have a truly carefree childhood. He was introduced to animation only after becoming an adult and decided it was time to enjoy his work. Disney creates several short films lasting a couple of minutes and sells them to a theater owner in Kansas City. The amount of the deal does not even cover the production costs, but this does not greatly concern the budding animator. Inspired by his success, Walt opens his own studio named Laugh-O-Gram Studio, hires a team, and begins producing animated films. Disney signs a contract to create several short films. However, due to the high production costs, it is unlikely that the project will break even, and soon the client finds himself in bankruptcy. Walt needs to pay salaries, which creates additional difficulties. Instead of cutting costs and creating more commercially appealing projects, Disney decides to take a risk. At this time, a New York company is conducting an intriguing experiment that combines film and animation. Although this approach is considered expensive, complex, and unpredictable in terms of success, he fully immerses himself in the work. Disney decides to adapt Alice in Wonderland. In his concept, a live girl enters the animated world and interacts with drawn characters and events. Along with his colleagues, he learns the professions on the go, writing the script, filming, drawing, and editing. At times, there is hardly any time left for sleep. Walt needs to complete a full version of Alice to present it to major New York companies and attract orders. Despite the tough times and uncertain future, Walt Disney later recalls that during that period, he felt happy and inspired. He was passionate about creativity, and reality did not overshadow his feelings. However, a buyer for Alice could not be found, and his company declares bankruptcy. In Hollywood of the 1920s, worldwide fame has not yet been achieved, but the entertainment industry is already actively developing. Although Walt Disney is clearly made for Hollywood, it is not obvious that Hollywood is made for him. After the failure of his animation studio, he moves to Los Angeles. Exhausted and in tattered clothes, Walt decides to change his ambitions and become a director. He wanders through studios, observes the filming, and tries to secure any job, but his efforts prove to be in vain. Earlier, Walt's older brother Roy moved to Los Angeles, more interested in California's mild climate than in Hollywood, as he struggled with lung issues. Roy always demonstrated a sensible and prudent approach. This quality would become one of the secrets to the successful operation of the Disney studio. But in the early 1920s, he simply sells vacuum cleaners to his younger brother and advises him to look for stable work with good pay. While Walt unsuccessfully tries to become a Hollywood director, he catches the attention of a woman named Margaret Winkler. Back in Kansas, Disney desperately sought a distributor for Alice in Wonderland, sending letters to all potential buyers, including Winkler. He receives a response from her only after moving to Los Angeles. It is worth pausing for a moment, as not everyone may understand the meaning of the term distributor. To better grasp the key points in our hero's life, let's briefly examine how the film business operates from the initial idea to realization. The process of producing a film or animation involves three main stages before the work reaches the audience. The first stage is production, which is handled by the studio. During this stage, scripts are developed, filming takes place, editing occurs, and ultimately, a finished product is created. The second stage is distribution, during which audiences gain access to the product created by the studio in the first stage. This principle existed in the film business 100 years ago and essentially remains relevant today. She is ready to order 12 episodes, offering $1,500 for each, which at that time is a considerable sum. In the early 1920s, a car in the U.S. cost about $500, while Disney was only earning $50 for his Laugh-O-Grams in Kansas. The advantages of Winkler's offer cannot be overstated. Walt immediately shares this news with his brother and offers him a partnership in the work. He needs a rational and cautious person like Roy. Although Roy would hardly be able to come up with what Walt ultimately realizes without his support, the Disney studio could face the same failures as the unsuccessful Laugh-O-Grams. It is Roy who will take on the responsibility for all business and organizational matters, making them an ideal team. Roy agreed to provide some assistance to his younger brother in this still uncertain venture. He plays a key role in securing a large portion of the budget for the filming, considering the grand scale of the Disney studio today and in the mid-20th century. It is hard to grasp, given how everything began. He is working on animation and filming live-action scenes with an actress in the nearby Riffet Park. However, filming there requires a permit, which they do not have. So they come each time and work until the police chase them away. After that, they enter through another entrance and continue filming until they are kicked out again. Everything has to be shot in one take, as the budding filmmaker has very little film. Despite this, Disney completes the first episodes and gets paid for them. However, distributor Winkler is not particularly impressed with the quality of the work and believes that the product needs improvements. Disney realizes this himself and understands that to enhance quality, he needs to bring in professionals in animation who can handle the task better than he can. Even at the initial stage, he is clearly aware of his limitations. Although Disney is passionate about drawing, his skills as an animator and director are insufficient. Therefore, he invites several specialists to join the team, including his colleague from Kansas, iWorks. The studio releases a new Alice series every 6 weeks, and the business begins to generate a steady income. Until this point, the studio was essentially a joint venture between the brothers. However, in 1926, Walt decides that the company will bear his name. This underscores his ambitious nature, but his brother does not object, and it is hard to argue that Walt was the main creator of ideas, the driving force, and the inspiration behind the entire process. I have already detailed the technical aspects of animation in the 1920s, but this only addresses the question of how it was created. It is equally important to consider the issue of content. It was no less primitive than the technologies themselves. In the mid-1920s, the main star of American animation was Felix the Cat. His short films, lasting only a few minutes, were built entirely on visual gags, jokes that could be understood without words or dialogue, as sound in film did not yet exist. For example, Felix rides a camel that suddenly goes under a low gate, and the character fails to pull his hands back in time, crashing into the wall. This is simply funny and understandable to both children and adults. To be honest, this thought resembles a cliché motivational quote from the internet. However, after familiarizing ourselves with the biography of the hero of the video, we begin to realize its true significance. Disney was always characterized by his belief in his own idea and resilience, even in the toughest moments when it seemed that everything was already over. Disney closely monitors the popularity of Felix and concludes that his studio needs its own star. The cats that have already flooded the animation market are not suitable. He is convinced that their character should be different from Felix and the others, evoking not only smiles and laughter, but also genuine affection. Thus, the character of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit is born. This time, there are no episodes with live actors, only pure animation. The visuals are overseen by iWorks, while the storyline is handled by Disney's team. The first short film makes a strong impression on the head of Universal Studios, and they immediately order 26 episodes. Employees, even at the lowest levels, do not refer to Mr. Disney as the manager or the boss. they simply call him Walt. All employees work diligently, yet the majority of the dividends and fame are exclusively received by Walt. Moreover, he knows how to inspire and motivate, although he can sometimes exhibit despotic traits in his demands. Dissatisfaction begins to build up in the studio, and Charles Mintz, Margaret Winkler's husband and one of the executives of their distribution company, decides to take advantage of this. The contract for creating new episodes of Oswald was signed through him. Mintz decides to lure away the disgruntled employees and start producing Oswald directly, without Walt Disney's involvement. He travels to New York, where Mintz's company is located, and tries to negotiate, but to no avail. Control over the characters slips away from him. Many animators leave the studio, and it becomes unclear how to make money now. At that moment, he realizes that he is repeating his father's fate, who suffered from failures throughout his life. On his way back from New York to Los Angeles, Walt Disney passes through Marceline, a small settlement near Kansas City. It is here that he spent part of his childhood while his father attempted to farm. He has always loved this place. The surrounding nature, the animals, and the sense of freedom were a complete contrast to life in the big cities. For Disney, Marceline will forever remain the perfect place, a symbol of his carefree childhood. Upon returning to Los Angeles, he realizes that he needs a new, successful character capable of surpassing Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Felix the Cat, and other competitors. The character is developed using rounded, stylized shapes. If desired, long ears can be added to create a rabbit with a short body, which already transforms it into a cat. Walt initially named the mouse Mortimer. Fortunately, by that time he was already married. Lillian had come to the studio a few years earlier and was working on character design. It was she who pointed out that Mortimer was a poor name and suggested naming him Mickey. Walt agreed with his wife. The main secret to Mickey Mouse's success was perhaps his personality. Disney decided that the character should be likable and optimistic, facing difficult situations with a smile and his head held high. To a certain extent, the mouse became a reflection of Disney himself. The studio releases several short films featuring the new character and attempts to sell them, but without success. Disney realizes that he needs some unique advantage to distinguish the hero from competitors, and he finds it in sound. In 1927, the film The Jazz Singer is released, becoming the first fully synchronized sound film where sound effects and dialogue are completely aligned with the visuals. Audiences experience a complete sense of live dialogue on the screen. Disney cannot ignore the new technology. He is willing to invest time and resources into this invention and will adhere to this principle for the rest of his life, regardless of the company's financial situation. At that time, no one was using full synchronized sound in animation, and this can be attributed to several reasons. First, such technology is expensive. Second, its implementation is quite complex. Additionally, it is unclear whether there is a real need for it, as audiences primarily expect comedic elements from animation that are understandable even without sound. However, these arguments do not deter Disney. He believes in the success of this idea. Therefore, he travels to New York to acquire sound recording equipment. Lacking sufficient funds, he turns to his brother for help in quickly finding financing, even if it means selling the car. Recording sound for the short film about Mickey Mouse proves to be challenging. During this time, a new problem arises. Walt personally establishes a rapport with the owner of a Broadway theater in New York to showcase Mickey Mouse in theaters for 2 weeks. In November 1928, audiences saw the 7-minute film about Mickey Mouse titled Steamboat Willie for the first time. These 7 minutes fundamentally changed the history of animation, cinema, and of course, Walt Disney's life. The audience was thrilled, especially by the use of sound. Although visually Steamboat Willie did not differ much from its competitors, the combination of imagery and synchronized sound was a true novelty. There were instances when viewers insisted on a repeat screening of the short film before the next feature began. The animated mouse quickly gained popularity in Hollywood, and people across the country flocked to theaters to see the new hero. Nevertheless, Walt Disney did not possess a deep understanding of public sentiment. He intuitively uncovered the formula for success that would later bring him fortune time and again. An engaging storyline, plus a charismatic character, plus innovative technology. Children were enchanted by the mouse. Roy Disney recognizes the need to create merchandise. The list of products could be endless, featuring Mickey Mouse and his girlfriend Minnie. The new cartoons and merchandise bring significant revenue to the studio. However, the excitement for the animation created by Walt and his team is felt not only by the audience. Many acclaimed directors around the world regard it as a significant achievement in visual art. This photograph captures Sergei Eisenstein, the renowned film classic, alongside Disney in the 1930s. A fan of Walt's studio work is once again expanding the staff. Nevertheless, Disney and his team often work late into the night to meet their deadlines. In 1931, Disney's wife, Lillian, was expecting a child. Walt had often stated that he dreamed of a large family. However, Lillian had her doubts, considering her husband's busy schedule at the studio. With excitement about the future baby, he began searching for a new home. But in the spring of that same year, Lillian suffered a miscarriage. Although Disney tries to maintain an appearance of normalcy and continues to work hard, it becomes clear over time that this event has deeply affected him. That same year, 30-year-old Walt, along with his wife, takes his first vacation. Does this make him any less hardworking? The project receives high praise in professional circles, attracting animators from across the country. Animation begins to incorporate sound and color, transforming into an art form and a respected profession rather than just amusing drawings. Walt focuses on training his staff, recognizing that animation adheres to the principles of visual arts. To this end, he invites professors from renowned universities to conduct lectures and practical drawing sessions. It is worth noting that in the 1930s, women constituted a noticeable minority among the several hundred employees at the studio. Accusations of sexism were voiced both during Disney's lifetime and after his death. One of his colleagues recalled that Walt could not stand cats and women. When asked why there were so few women among animators, Disney claimed that they did not possess sufficient creativity. Although there were few women at the studio, This was characteristic of the time. Men were more frequently hired and paid better. Let me be clear, Walt Disney was not a perfect person, and we will see evidence of this multiple times. However, the accusations of sexism against him seem exaggerated. In the 1930s, despite the Great Depression, Walt's business flourishes. His studio successfully grows, attracting talented professionals and setting new standards. He has a long-awaited daughter, and later he and his wife adopt a 3-year-old girl. Disney would not be who he is if he had settled for what he had achieved and continued to profit from already established projects. The story of Snow White had occupied Walt since the early 1930s. He had a complete composition in his mind that could not fit into either 5-7 minutes or even an hour. Disney plans to create the first full-length animated feature in history. Roy doubts the success of this idea and fears it will lead the studio to ruin. This is quite understandable, as animation requires more time, effort, and resources compared to a regular film. Furthermore, there are no guarantees that audiences will want to spend an hour and a half watching drawn characters. Naturally, Roy will object. Walt is only concerned with what will ultimately appear on the screen. The main issue is not only that 80 minutes equal 5,000 seconds and that more than 100,000 drawings will need to be created for this, but also that the entire story must differ significantly from short animations. It is impossible to hold the audience's attention for an hour and a half solely through jokes. A plot filled with deep emotions that the audience has not previously experienced while watching animation must be presented. To achieve this, everything on screen must look as natural as possible, from the characters' movements to their appearance and expressions of emotion. The studio's artists are once again studying the art of drawing in accordance with reality. To train the animators, real animals, a ballet dancer, dwarfs, and others who could serve as prototypes for the characters in the upcoming film are brought into the studio. The production of the story of Snow White continues for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and the deadlines are still uncertain. In Hollywood, rumors are actively circulating that this project could ruin the studio. They are still borrowing money from the bank, and the budget has already exceeded a record $1.5 million. At the same time, there are no guarantees that audiences will be interested in the film. In 1937, 6 years after the development began, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is released in theaters. At the premiere, Walt tightly grips his wife's hand, closely watching the audience's reaction. When the scene of the main character's death arrives, sobs can be heard in the hall. At that moment, Disney realizes that he has achieved his goal. The audience fully empathizes with the animated characters, which is a testament to the film's success. Walt Disney opens a new chapter in art, fundamentally changing the history of animation and becoming one of the key figures in the film industry, as well as a legend. Despite his busy schedule, Walt always strives to spend time with his daughters. He reads to them before bed, spends weekends with them, and plays a lot. He tries to give them the childhood he never experienced himself. However, it is important not to idealize Walt. Throughout his life, he worked on creating the image of a simple American from the provinces. But by the 1930s, especially after the success of Snow White, his public persona increasingly diverged from his true self. This will soon become evident The studio's triumphant project becomes a real problem for Disney. It is more challenging to achieve success again after creating a global phenomenon. A new challenge arises when the American Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences presents Disney with a consolation honorary statuette outside of the nominations, suggesting that animation is still not regarded as a legitimate art form. In response, Walt accepts the challenge and decides to release one feature film every 6 months, even though it took years to create just Snow White. The first project on this list becomes Fantasia. If you haven't heard of this cartoon yet, it's not surprising at all. In the late 1930s, Disney insisted that this project would become his #1 work and definitively prove that animation is true art. However, describing the plot of Fantasia is quite difficult, as it is virtually non-existent. It is a 2-hour, largely abstract animated film accompanied by classical music. It consists of several segments, each featuring works by renowned composers such as Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, and Mussorgsky. Disney intended it to be just that. Animation is a true and timeless art form. At this time, the studio is actively working on 2 feature films, Pinocchio and Dumbo. The plots of these films are clearer, but all 3 projects share qualities such as complexity, expense, and innovation. The artists continue to push the boundaries of animation. It is important to understand that what appears on screen are merely drawings moving at a speed of 24 frames per second. In 1940, the studio moved to a new complex that cannot simply be called an office or a building. It is a whole mini-city. Disney joked that it had everything except housing for employees, which would have been convenient since they could have stayed there all the time. The new complex is equipped not only with practical workspaces, but also with restaurants, cafes, gyms, and relaxation areas. It truly resembles the office of dreams, although it is important to remember that this refers to the year 1940. During this tumultuous period in Walt's life, a tragedy occurs. In the new home, purchased with his brother for their parents, the heating system turns out to be faulty, leading to a carbon monoxide leak. The dark period in Walt's life continues into 1940-1941. Fantasia, Pinocchio, and Dumbo are released, receiving high praise from critics, and audiences flock to theaters, even for the unconventional Fantasia. However, due to the enormous budgets, the films do not generate a profit. This is clearly compounded by the enormous expenses of building a new studio, which Walt began without consulting his brother. Disney attributes his problems to the war that had started in Europe and the fact that the cartoons were not shown in several countries. While this did have an impact, the main reason is likely that Walt's ideas turned out to be too ambitious. Later, he admits that, for example, Fantasia was an overly complex project. Walt did not possess refined taste or intellectual inclinations. Nevertheless, it is fair to say that all 3 films hold a prestigious place in the history of animation and have inspired numerous generations of artists. Unfortunately, this does not save the studio. In the early 1940s, it finds itself on the brink of bankruptcy, and the only way out is to go public. Problems arise not only from external sources, but also from within the company, despite the fact that the new offices are comfortable and tidy. The spacious offices begin to resemble a laboratory, where each employee performs their task. With nearly 1,000 staff members, the studio loses its tangible atmosphere, transforming into a soulless corporation, far removed from the small creative family it once was. Disney himself now has a private office with a bedroom and bathroom, as well as a significant number of secretaries and assistants. This division is felt at other levels as well. The studio has a department of lead artists who are respected and receive decent salaries. However, employees in lower positions earn so little that they often cannot afford lunch in the cafeteria. These changes are observed not only in the company Disney, but also throughout Hollywood. Film production is becoming a highly profitable business, while the main profits go to studio executives, star actors, and directors. In response to the situation, unions and guilds begin to emerge. In live-action cinema, they appear a bit earlier, while the Animators Guild is established in the early 1940s. It includes workers from all studios in the country, except for Disney, which accounts for nearly half of Walt's entire industry workforce. The situation with the unions does not particularly concern him, as he believes his subordinates are satisfied. He provides them with the opportunity to engage in creative work and pays them at a respectable level. What more could a Disney employee wish for, after all, as this is precisely why they come to the company? To work for the greatness of animation. Old also sincerely believes that he remains part of the team and just like everyone else. However, he does not realize how he has become a symbol of the typical industrial boss, and only now understands that his artists can form a union. Disney decides to hold a meeting with the employees. Instead of the expected conciliatory address that could demonstrate understanding and goodwill, he makes threats. The main message of his speech boils down to a simple thought: everyone gets what they deserve, and think twice before joining a union. Art Babbitt, one of the leading artists not only at the studio, but in the entire industry, becomes the first significant animator to stand up against Walt. He is the creator of Goofy. When Babbitt joins the union, Disney immediately fires him. After this, several hundred employees declare a strike, organizing pickets at the entrance to the studio, forcing Walt to use a different entrance. One day, upon seeing Disney, Babbitt grabs a megaphone and starts shouting slogans. This leads to Walt jumping out of his car, resulting in a scuffle. Eventually, other protesters pull Babbitt and Disney apart. However, this does not change Walt's mood. He continues to disbelieve that his employees are simply dissatisfied with their working conditions. One of Disney's greatest talents has always been storytelling. A key element of a good plot is a powerful villain, which Walt found in real life. He was repeatedly accused of sexism, anti-Semitism, and racism, but in reality, the only group he harbored hatred for was communists, a topic we will return to later. At that moment, Walt feels a strong sense of confusion and anger, so he decides to take a business trip to South America. According to the U.S. government, he is the perfect candidate to establish cultural ties with this key region. There, he is greeted like a superstar. He is a true idol, and people adore his cartoons and characters. Disney continues his trip, not even returning for his father's funeral. His brother Roy, who is more pragmatic, realizes that unions have become a new reality that must be acknowledged. He manages to resolve the conflict even before Walt's arrival. Despite the agreement made upon his return, Disney realizes that a change has occurred at the studio. The atmosphere of a creative family has vanished, and he can no longer trust anyone. He instructs his secretary to gather in a separate pile the documents of employees who participated in the strike, confident that sooner or later they will leave the company. This vividly illustrates Walt's dark side. When someone disagreed with him or showed resistance, he became cruel and cunning. Against the backdrop of these events in 1942, Bambi is released, another acclaimed masterpiece from the studio. However, like the three previous feature films, its production turned out to be too expensive, and it failed to recoup its costs. It's hard to believe, but it is precisely in the early 40s that Disney will effectively cease to be an animation studio. Although they will continue to create cartoons, including feature-length films, this will no longer be the company's primary source of profit. Disney, on one hand, believes that the financial failures were caused by the war in Europe, but on the other hand, he acknowledges that the war, to some extent, saved the studio from collapse. During this period, the company survived solely through government contracts, producing educational and propaganda cartoons in collaboration with the government. Disney realizes that they can significantly reduce production costs simply by streamlining their methods. The first significant project of the studio after the war is Song of the South, a musical film created using a combination of animation and live action. In the mid-40s, this approach was considerably simpler than full animation. Although critics note the technical merits of the film, this does not become the main topic of discussion. Today, legal access to this film is extremely difficult. The film depicts slaves singing on a plantation in a nostalgic light. It is released just after the war, when segregation is once again on the rise in the U.S., which provokes strong outrage among many African Americans. Disney struggles to understand the criticism. He genuinely aimed to create an authentic American story based on his vision. However, considering that the studio still tries to hide Song of the South, it becomes clear that the issue was not solely with the communists. After the war, the U.S. states, including Hollywood, begins an active fight against the Red Threat. Executives of major companies come to an agreement on the necessity of protecting American ideals from communists. Legal hearings are launched with the aim of identifying participants in the communist movement among industry figures. Many of them, just 6 years prior, were key figures in union pickets. However, Disney provides no evidence of their connections to the Communist Party. In his eyes, revenge for their opposition has no statute of limitations. As a result of the hearings, the famous Hollywood blacklist is formed, which will undermine the careers of many actors and industry figures of that time. Although the names of those criticized by Disney do not appear on it, this case once again reveals the darker side of Walt's character. Disney Studio is searching for new formats that can generate significant profits while requiring lower production costs compared to feature-length animation. As a result, they discover several successful solutions. The first format becomes feature-length live-action films. Among the significant successes of this period is Treasure Island, an adventure film that perfectly captures the spirit of Disney's entertainment for all ages. The second unexpected format developed by Disney is wildlife documentaries. These vibrant films, showcasing the lives of monkeys in the jungle and bears at the North Pole, were first created by Disney in the late 1940s. However, there is a certain storyline. The main character is chosen to be a penguin chick and its mother, while the antagonist is either a predator or a natural element that hinders the heroes from achieving their goal and threatens their lives. The first project in this format was Disney's documentary about sea lions in Alaska. This approach quickly set the standard for the genre, bringing significant profits to the studio. Production is inexpensive, and the animals do not go on strike. In 1950, Cinderella was released in theaters. Many of you have probably seen this film, and it's no surprise. It has become a true classic. Immediately after its release, the film receives high praise from critics, and its significant box office earnings indicate its popularity with audiences. It would seem that Walt Disney should be pleased, but he realizes that Cinderella is technically simpler than the studio's previous projects. In personal conversations, Disney admitted that he is unlikely to create anything better than Snow White. At nearly 50 years old, he is experiencing an obvious midlife crisis. What can a man in his position and with such a state of mind do? Buy a yacht, take a mistress, and leave for a year. To Europe. What does the wolf do? He starts creating models of toy train sets. It all began 2 years earlier when Disney visited his hometown of Marceline and, upon returning, built a large-scale model of a railway in his yard and another one at the studio. Perhaps this is an attempt to reclaim a lost childhood, but Disney takes it very seriously. He invites famous guests, such as Salvador Dali, to share in his achievements. At that time, no one could have predicted how this new passion would unfold. The exact date when the idea of Disneyland first appeared in Walt's mind is unknown, but it likely occurred during his fascination with railroads. In 1952, he sells part of his property, the studio, and the rights to his name to embark on something entirely new. Disney conceptualizes not just an amusement park, but a whole parallel world. Although amusement parks and carnivals already existed, they were often dirty and poorly maintained. In Disney's mind, an image forms of a place where parents can spend time with their children and immerse themselves in amazing worlds. Roy, of course, does not agree with his brother's new concept. The project may require tens of millions of dollars and does not guarantee a return on investment. Moreover, it is necessary to find additional sources of funding, as the sale of real estate does not cover all expenses. However, Walt has already developed an idea: television. The 1950s is a time of rapid television development. Screens become an integral part of American homes, and new channels emerge. However, the main problem lies in the lack of content. These channels convinced Disney to create series and programs for them, offering payment in return. He will handle this himself, but the real goal of the deal is the park. Now he has the necessary funding. Later, he will joke that the channel's management was so desperately seeking content that they decided to acquire an entire park. However, it is worth noting Walt's risky approach. Despite being over 50 and having become a legend, he still takes on a project that could lead to the studio's bankruptcy. This is largely due to the fact that, despite all the contracts signed, creating the park will be very expensive. Additionally, it is quite problematic to call the vast area planned for several separate worlds a large park. The construction of the park is carried out in the best traditions of the studio's ambitious projects. The budget exceeded the planned expenses by 3 times, reaching nearly $20 million. At the last moment before the opening, there is a feeling that the builders will not finish the work in time. Disney himself actively participates and helps paint the walls. Nevertheless, in July 1955, Disneyland opens its doors to visitors for the first time. Thanks to active advertising, including in Disney's own television show, a real buzz is created. Disneyland quickly gains popularity not only in the United States, but also beyond its borders. There is a famous incident involving Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. During his trip to the United States, he was very eager to visit Disneyland with his wife. However, his security team prohibited it for safety reasons, which greatly disappointed Khrushchev. Disneyland brings the company millions of dollars annually, quickly becoming a phenomenon of American culture. Walt seemed to be inspired by the anticipation of visitors as much as they were themselves. He had an apartment practically on the park's grounds, and he would sometimes descend there in his bathrobe before the workday began to make fresh juice from the vending machine and stroll through the streets before opening. Despite the success, Walt begins to contemplate his legacy. In 1961, he turned 60, and soon after, the legendary film Mary Poppins is released. The film wins several Oscars and becomes a major box office hit, vividly reflecting the studio's philosophy. It is colorful, musical, and suitable for both children and parents. Despite its popularity, Mary Poppins stands in stark contrast to the events of that time in the United States: the assassination of Kennedy, the Vietnam War, and the fight against discrimination. This is a different America. Although Walt did not engage in political activism, he nonetheless made donations to the Republican Party, which held conservative views. It is quite ironic, considering that today the Disney Corporation stands on completely opposite ideological positions, but that is a separate topic. During this time, Walt's health begins to decline. He started smoking at a young age and was known for his severe cough. Studio employees often noted that they could recognize the boss's approach by the distinctive sound of his cough. In 1966, during the filming of a promotional movie for the second Disneyland, Walt fell ill during an examination. Doctors diagnosed him with lung cancer, with a prognosis of no more than 2 years to live. Walt passed away a few months later at the age of 65. The following day, his death was reported by all the leading newspapers around the world. Some may argue that everything Walt Disney created carries a hint of primitivism and fast food. There is some truth to this. On the other hand, it is hard to deny that Disney animation not only shaped generations of viewers around the world, but also helped to grapple with questions of good and evil, love and hate, as well as what makes us human. Walt Disney was a complex and contradictory figure, and it is perhaps this that allowed him to deeply understand human nature.